And scene.
Hey, that was the last line in a previous video. So, Demolition Man is a film that's not often referenced, but in the internet circles that we move in from time to time or pay attention to, it does get brought up with some regularity as, or primarily in reference to its quote unquote predicting the future or making accurate predictions about how life is now. So we both having seen it, I think, roughly within the past year or two, which is the first time I had seen it, and I remember enjoying it at the time. So we decided to make that one the second film that we talked about. So when we sort of came to a consensus on this, when we rewatched it for this episode, it even just having seen it within the past couple of years, it did not hold up at all. I remembered enjoying it and thinking it was not amazing but decent, but like rewatching through it with a critical eye, just
No, just no.
it was rough. It took me multiple days, even like having to watch it while at work. It's just like, okay, I'm doing something. I need something to distract me, so I just watch it in bits between working. But yeah, it is an action film from the early '90s, still carrying a lot of the '80s sensibilities with it, with the incessant attempting to be clever one-liners to terrible dialogue choices. Not the best script, I gotta say. I mean, it's not that there's nothing good in it. Just as a film that came out in the early '90s, '93, I believe October 7th, approximately, there was the release date. The script had been in development for 6 years at that point. And his name escapes me at the moment, but the writer who got the main credit on that, you got two writers that got story by and screenplay, and then another writer that's credited with screenplay. His contributions to it were only like 2.5 weeks of work on, and most of that was just making it funny. So, I mean, it had been in typical Hollywood fashion in development and just nothing really happening for years until it actually got made. So a lot of residual what's the word, the sensibilities from the '80s, which I'm not terribly a great big fan of action films in the '80s. Some are enjoyable, but they're just trying too hard, a bit over the top, too macho, and this seems to suffer from all those things that I don't particularly care for.
And yet here we are making videos about these movies. Like, these are our first choices.
Yep. Yeah. We decided this. We did it to ourselves, and
that's how we roll.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Just like the opening scene, the camera is panning over Hollywood Hills, and there's flames going on. Even that shot just made me wince, and I was sitting there going, same movie, right? Or is this like the special edition added features scene stuff? I didn't remember that. I didn't remember how bad like the destruction of LA was, how that whole thing was shot. What happened? Like
I mean that as far as the script is concerned, that scene was added pretty late. Even a different screenwriter. I don't know if that was his only contribution to it, but that whole opening scene didn't exist in previous drafts, and I skimmed a 1989 draft from the original writer, and sorry, names escape me, but I'm not too broken up about that. So original writer had a script that he was trying to shop around, and it was essentially the core concept was cop cryogenically frozen, reawoken in the future, and he had a tough time selling that concept. So they had, in typical Hollywood fashion, various people do various rewrites on it. So that scene was added pretty late, with the idea of setting up what the past was a little bit better, because the previous script just took place in the future, and this particular writer thought, well, we need to establish the chaos that they came from. But yeah, just the entire sequence, just hugely, hugely over the top, very cringy dialogue. Not great. I enjoy over the top villains, but I think Wesley Snipes is perhaps a bit over influenced by Jack Nicholson's The Joker from a few years before, 4 years before that. Just struck me as kind of a similar-ish type of character to that, just over the top and funny, but really didn't work in this. I just seemed to me that Batman and Batman Returns were heavily influential on the tone of this film, and just kind of a little more goofy than suits my taste. But
Yeah, because Batman's not goofy. No.
No, that's
No.
it's the most grounded of things.
Yeah. So, yeah, you had that intro scene, and that none of that shot looked great. As far as like the action goes, and like with Wesley Snipes, I can give you some credit there. I can kind of see a little bit of Joker happening there. Also, Wesley Snipes, I think, was just enjoying himself too. I think it's
as much as he hated his haircut, which he destroyed
yeah.
immediately after. I would too.
I've also noticed there was something about the 80s and 90s and that orange color. Like, think Fifth Element. That same orange color was all through that show too. Like, is it an action thing? I don't know.
Yeah, and that
Maybe
was
his hair even.
That was in the 2000s, I believe. But yeah. So I mean, I guess the kind of the only positive thing I have to say about the intro, I mean, other than it did effectively establish the tone of the film. If you watch the intro, you know exactly what you're getting into. Terrible dialogue, and I know you're not supposed to expect a tremendous amount of realism from that type of action film, but Wesley Snipes dumping a bunch of gas on the floor, Stallone walking into it, and then a minute later is like, hey, by the way, you're standing in gasoline, as opposed to him just walking in the room and them both choking on how heavy the gas was, and then he's holding the torch and holds it inches above the gas and threatens to set it on fire. It's like, well, that would have blown up long before then. Perhaps that's nitpicks, but that it just took me out of it really, really quickly.
I liked it more after the thing actually does light on fire. Stallone's like, well, that's slightly annoying. Runs through the flames and like tackles Wesley Snipes anyway.
Don't do it all. Set it on fire. Sets it on fire. He just runs through. Yeah. So that opening scene, not great, but it does effectively set things up and is a massive contrast to things 30 odd years later. Yeah, so positive thing about the opening thing, apparently as far as the stunt work goes, the jump that Stallone does out of the helicopter was done by a stuntman, and that was the first time that somebody had bungee jumped out of a helicopter at that height. They'd done similar heights, just like off of, I forget if it was like buildings or cliffs, but like fixed objects, but it was the first time a bungee jump of that height had been done out of a helicopter. So that's a cool bit of trivia, but doesn't, in the film, it's not a bungee cord, he just jumps 200 feet and stops and doesn't get snapped in half at all.
Yeah, totally fine. But yeah, this is definitely an 80s-esque action movie. There's no question of it whatsoever. But then it gets into the prophetic stuff.
Yeah. So as I rewatched it, and yeah, there's just, I did rewatch it with an eye toward, okay, so how did this quote unquote predict the future? And there are ways that I struggle to find the right phrasing for it, but like not necessarily guessed how things would go, but just stuff it did that's just sort of how things happen. So it's not that it predicted the future, but there's the scene after scene of the VR sex scene where after Sandra Bullock's character mentioned physical touching has been outlawed and procreation happens in labs, there's no exchange of fluids. Mentioned AIDS was a much bigger issue at the time, and the thing it predicted, which is just kind of how things have happened for hundreds of years, is you have a highly prevalent infectious disease and the government steps in with, well, we have to eradicate this disease, so the government takes a bunch of control and micromanages people's lives, and you get a fascism and a dictatorship. There's a very high correlation in the real world and in history of prevalence of infectious diseases in a country that then results in a fascist dictatorship. So that, say, with a post-COVID lens and how the world responded to that, there are a variety of opinions on that, but historically speaking, governing bodies have used the presence of infectious diseases to seize power, to gain control, to get into people's homes. And this, I don't think this necessarily predicted that. It's just that's how it happened, and that happens to be in the script. So predictive of the future, technically-ish, but also not really.
Just to help people out, so AIDS was about as prevalent. It didn't get people trapped in their houses, but no. It was always on the news. It was what everyone talked about. It was, people had a stigma and a fear of catching it by, I don't know, eating shared cheese. It was just in every conversation for a very long time. And now we had COVID, so.
At that, yeah, even to, I'd recently rewatched the It from 2017, and the, not great with names if you haven't noticed, but the sort of short, skinny character who's very disease paranoid and had the, what sort of Munchausen by proxy relationship with her son. He was freaking out about AIDS. So in that film, and that was set in 1988 or 89, I believe it was. So yeah, definitely much more of a thing. Wasn't as bad of a thing as it could have been, thankfully. But yeah, it did. And in that small scene, just like, yes, that's an accurate observation as to what spawns fascism. And then that, of course, balloons into, well, any food that's unhealthy is outlawed, and just anything that's viewed as unclean is shoved to the fringes.
Aggressive speaking. The jokes with getting a fine, and they ran with that joke for a while.
That when I first watched it, that's the first thing that irritated me. Like the first couple of times, you have been fined 1 credit for such and such. I mean, as many times as it's in there, I can't remember what it says. But after probably the 4th or 5th time, it's like, okay, that's a bit much. That's a bit much. That's a bit much, and it just kept going and kept going and kept going. Yeah. Anywho. But yeah, the AIDS thing, leading to the very sanitized, safe mother state that they lived in is at least loosely comparable to how things happen in real life, and is very integral to the story, because Wesley Snipes' character, Phoenix, is reawakened to take out Friendly. Is it John Friendly?
Edgar
Friendly, yeah. Who's sort of the leader of the people from underground, the undesirables, the unclean things that you have. Dr. Cocteau, I believe his name is, who's the central character in how society in LA functions now. It was because of him that he's viewed as this savior and engineer of the society they have, and he reawakens Phoenix to exterminate Edgar Friendly. Just sort of similarly, lost my train of thought, but just treating him as free thought and somebody who just wants to do what they want to do, whether or not it's good for them. That's viewed as a contaminant, because everyone should do what is good for them, or at least what the governing body has decided is good for them. So that's very, very central to what's going on, and does, at least in its very clumsily written way, somewhat accurately reflect how things happen. So no, it's fine. It's just, I was right when you said Dr. What was his name? Cocteau.
I wonder if that's a playoff for like Dr. Zhivago. And because you had the animals and the curated island, everything was under his control. I don't know. It sounds
Dr. Moreau.
Dr. Moreau. Thank you. What was Dr. Zhivago?
Chicago, that was,
Okay, so first of all, internet. Walking Encyclopedia, watch this. Patch Adams, director and year it came out.
Ooh, Patrick. Nope, I'm getting that mixed up with something else. I'm actually not particularly familiar with that.
Okay, you're going to have to edit that out. Blade.
Blade.
Yes.
Is that a book?
Oh. Yes.
Start that one guy from that thing.
Yeah. It's like the same dude that's in the movie we're talking about now. Yeah.
Stallone?
Yeah.
Blade, yeah, 1998 came out. 5 years later, another solid Wesley Snipes.
I put up with this all the time when we're talking about it.
I do forget the precise box office, but that is the actual resurgence of the Marvel brand in the 90s after they sold off a bunch of properties to stave off bankruptcy and yeah. So the
Whoops.
yeah, the first. Well, we can save that one for another video. But the first, although not technically, of something that apparently didn't happen until what 2018 was it when Black Panther came out? But as far as black superheroes, you had Blade in 1998, and then technically speaking, Spawn came out 2 years before that, and if I remember his name, Jonathan Rhys Meyers, I believe it was. A black man. So back in '96, first black superhero.
Now,
technically-ish,
Spawn is both a cult classic and it's painful to watch. It really depends who you're talking to.
Yep. So slight rabbit trail, but still on theme. That's one I tried to watch a while back, and it just really, really did not click. There are a lot of action films from the '90s that I do genuinely like. I've been rewatching some of those of the past year. Con Air, over the top, ridiculous, really enjoyable.
Nick Cage being Nick Cage, like 100%.
It's all those actors being all those actors to the max. Ridiculous, over the top, but just a well-made, enjoyable action film. So there were, at least as far as the preferences that I brought to Demolition Man, I do really enjoy action films in the 90s. I didn't grow up watching a lot of them, wasn't allowed to, being a kid in a conservative home.
Both of us
at the time. Yeah, so we have nothing to talk about.
This was actually my first rated R movie, Demolition Man.
Oh yeah.
It was church group in the basement, and I was younger by, I don't know, a few years than everyone else there. But yeah, they fired up Demolition Man, and I just remember like being completely horrified and scarred, and now rewatching, going, oh, this is like so different than when I was a little kid. Oh my gosh! But
and extremely, extremely dated. There's some stuff in the 90s that you throw on today, and it's like, well, you can kind of tell it's in the 90s, but it's still a really solid film. The Rock was one of those.
Oh, yeah.
Drug on a bit long in typical spacing on his name, the director, typical fashion, but just a very well-made film that could have come out any time between then and there in the next decade and not really looked out of place, or as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, thoroughly enjoy action films from the 90s. Just this one did not work. There's a lot going on, but it feels overlong and tedious. They kind of they do a good job of getting to what everything is about very quickly, but then beyond that, it just drags, because there is the I guess mystery of what's going on. Cocteau's a villain pretty early on, as soon as Phoenix doesn't kill him. Anything. So getting fined for swearing, having speech censored, and the police force neutered. Essentially,
like corporations were all busy eating each other up. They go into the whole like Taco Bell's like the only restaurant.
When the corporate wars was
franchise wars.
Franchise wars. I was going to reference Corporate Wars, which is a cyberpunk reference, but franchise war. They came out, and probably the easiest bit of trivia in this entire movie but also interesting, did you know that in certain European versions it's Pizza Hut that was the brand that won the franchise wars.
I would have put my money on Pizza Hut. Yeah.
Yeah, they some people don't think so, but interesting trivia if a person happens to be interested in trivia. This was the, like I mentioned, the bungee jumping out of the helicopter was the first time that stunt had been done. In the certain European versions, switching Taco Bell to Pizza Hut was the first instance of localized product placement in a film. They chose Taco Bell in America because Taco Bell is a very recognizable name, but outside of America, Pizza Hut is a more recognizable franchise. So this was one of the, if not the first example of versions of a film being localized as far as product placement goes for a specific market in a small way. But little bit of trivia if anybody finds that interesting.
And action movies, I mean, they're kind of dying off for the most part these days. I mean, I know John Wick just came out.
Yeah, John
which
Wick
is
4.
Excellent.
Did video on that. Absolutely. I've seen it 5 times.
How many times have your girlfriend seen it?
5 times. She's on 11, actually.
All right.
6 times in the theater, twice the day it was released digitally, once the next day, twice the next day. So it is for however much silliness is in it, like bulletproof suits and falling off 3-story buildings and down 222 steps, a phenomenally well-made action film.
See, I mean, the premise of action films, I mean, they're always going to be a little bit ridiculous to begin with. I mean, in real life, like, you just trip. You fall on the ground and you're doing that whole, like, Family Guy thing of, and that's real life, but when you have action movies, like, a guy takes a kick to the head, he just kind of, like, does this, like, what?
At a certain age, that's just standing up from the couch.
Yeah, now it's just everything hurts. Now
unless you're Keanu Reeves or Donnie Yen, who, even holding back, he was still the best thing in John Wick 4.
And people don't. Some of these people don't age. I mean, there's always a joke that Keanu Reeves hasn't really aged. Sandra Bullock being in this movie, that's another person people just says she just doesn't age.
There's not I hear it's not all entirely natural, to put it lightly, but when you see her in this or
Bullet Train,
or
she was in Bullet Train.
Yeah, mostly voice, but appeared a bit in there in Bullet Train or
Lost City.
Lost City, which last year, not a good film, but funny.
I laughed quite a bit at that.
I laughed a lot in that, and it's like it was dumb, but at a certain point in film, it's just like, this is a good movie. It's just funny because I'm actually laughing.
I'll give some credit to Daniel Radcliffe. He always likes to pick these completely insane goofball movies to star in, and seeing him play a villain in that movie actually was pretty darn good.
It was it was different and at least interesting.
Harry Potter's a menace.
Yeah.
But rabbit trails.
Well, there's I think a 1995 film I was trying to remember the name of. She's a computer person on that.
That movie was just called The Net.
The Net, that was it.
Yeah,
I was thinking
boy, there's something that's
net
aged.
code, source code, wasn't it?
No, nothing that
The
fancy.
Net.
Yeah, it's just The Net.
1995.
They were talking about the horrors of someone who can do things on the internet, and just to. Oh, I did recently. No, it wasn't recently. I watched that like maybe 2 years ago, and even 2 years ago, I'm just like, oh my gosh, wow.
It's
just really
very,
wow.
Yeah, technologically speaking, there's a lot from the 90s that does not age well. I mean, the exponential increase in the computing power of electronics has been massive since then, but it is kind of funny to see very, very dated concepts of technology.
It is amusing, not gonna lie.
But that was like 5 rabbit trails in one.
Yeah.
Potentially more. So there's
we need content.
Speech being censored. Well, I think my favorite moment in the movie is when Phoenix is walking up to the phone booth thing, and you hear the guy just like, I just feel like there's nothing special about me. It's like, that's a line that you could hear a lot nowadays in various forms. So that was That was the thing. Yeah, police force just proceed with extreme assertiveness. Yeah, or another the paraphrase is like, we're the police. We haven't been trained to deal with this kind of violence.
Listening to Rob Schneider in any role always makes me cringe just a little bit.
Yeah, not so much. I like before this film, I didn't necessarily, I couldn't put the face to the name, but I was like, now I get the comments that
the laugh made the three seashells thing. Yeah,
yeah.
And no, we're not. No, we're not going to talk about the three seashells. No, don't you do it. Don't you? No.
Did you know? That was just a. Well, I'm not going to use that turn of phrase, but it
was just supposed to be a quick one-off joke, and that thing has
apparently
gone through the ages.
Made a thing. Even it's like been referenced in other things. And I read an interview with one of the writers from a couple of years ago, and they have been kicking. I mean, like not seriously, but if there is to be a sequel, that's one thing that Stallone's daughter and the three seashells seem to be the two biggest things that people care about. Which there in previous versions of the script there was a subplot and much more involving his daughter that ended up just getting edited out.
Yeah, it's just a toss away one line.
But then going back to Cyberpunk, there is a reference to the three seashells in Cyberpunk 2077, if one looks in the proper place. So,
okay, we got that out of the way then, right?
Yeah, I mean, even as we were. Yes.
If you want to dwell on the three seashells, you go ahead. It's okay.
Unless it's somebody selling them by the seashore as a vocal warm-up, I'm not particularly interested. But, so, I mean, the rabbit trails we've been taking were kind of just how, as we were talking about this beforehand, we just quickly realized there's not a whole lot to say about this film unless it's trivia like the stunt thing or the product placement, the localized product placement thing. There's not a tremendous amount to be said about it, honestly. I don't know if there's much more that we can go into as far as it, quote unquote, predicting the future. I mean, there's a bunch of little comments, but I don't know if there's much of substance much of substance to be discussed beyond that. Maybe.
I mean, I'll mention like kind of the cornballiness of the whole movie, the whole underground Edgar Friendly thing, and then one of the characters is he looks kind of like a goofy version of Stallone by the end, and he's one of the underground people, and just all that, the periscope coming out of the ground that looks around, the graffiti that's instant that pops up out of the ground. If you need that much technology just to put down graffiti, I don't know.
It just the whole thing is very. I would equate it to Batman Forever or Batman and Robin. Very similar in feel, in look, in tone, just goofy for the sake of being goofy.
Was that the same producer?
I want to say ultimately they were both for Warner Brothers, if I remember correctly. It was Joel Silver was the primary producer on Demolition Man. However, I believe that was Warner Brothers was involved somehow. I don't remember precisely how, but I was reading an article where the president of Warner Brothers at the time was commenting on it. So, ish. And there was a big push around that time for merchandising. I mean, Star Wars influenced quite a bit, and a big reason why they went in a change of direction with Batman and Robin was the second one, third one. So
that's
Batman,
one, yeah.
Batman Begins. No, good Lord, Batman Returns.
Yes,
mixing decades like a Cuisinart over here. So you had Batman Returns, Batman and Robin, Batman Forever, and a big push for the second two was merchandising and toys and.
It was a like weird time in the 80s where you had these extremely violent rated R movies and then toys like crazy for 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds. RoboCop being RoboCop, insanely gory, violent, love it all movie. But that thing was marketed like crazy to the tiniest little kids, and no one really ever questioned it. It was
Yeah.
not really a thing. Not until like around the like mid '90s when they started to go. We call these rated R for a reason. You know, whether you choose to bring your kids in, that's fine. But why are we just doing business just with the idea that there's just an army of little kids to watch our gory rated R movies? So
Yeah.
and that kind of happened, I think, with this a bit. It goes back to kind of it being cornball, but there was like a lot of stuff that felt like these were jokes set up for more like 12 year olds. And then you had all this over the top violence again. So it was, again, I think that's part of one of the stigmas that goes with doing an 80s and 90s action flick.
Yeah, it really felt like it was written for 10 to 12-year-olds who were going to sneak out and see it. I was watching, it's like, this seems like something the kids really would have wanted to go see back in 93, back when you had to sneak out to go see films you weren't allowed to see.
And kids were more likely to like sneak from one theater to another back then, I think, than they are like nowadays.
Let's see, what
and
else?
Stuff.
I don't know what family film came out in 93, but buy a ticket for one, go to the other, or get an older kid from school to fake being your guardian to bring you into an R-rated film. And I mean, and content-wise, it's not particularly over the top in any way, especially
to us now.
Say like compared to RoboCop, that's still very intense.
Yeah.
At parts, Paul Verhoeven does not pull punches. But yeah, I think.
But Joel Silver, he's done. He's done what? Producer, Die Hard and
Die Hard, Lethal Weapon, The Matrix. He was his I believe first credit as a producer was associate producer on The Warriors in '79, which was heavily referenced in John Wick 4 trivia. So yeah, he's sort of credited with revolutionizing how 80 or action films were done in the 80s. I don't know like the cultural reach or influence of The Warriors, but I know it's still held in very high regard. Lethal Weapon is still held in high regard, and though only seen the first one of that, but that one does hold up as far as 80s action films are concerned. Die Hard is an indisputable classic
Christmas movie.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That if you argue against that, you're insane.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm should be thrown out of a building.
A building without being told.
By surprise.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a bit of more trivia.
We are not staying on track with this movie.
No. Which there's not all that much to say. So
Sandra Bullock, she does a good job with what she's given.
Nominated for a Razzie for this film. I was very surprised to find. I mean, she acted the hell out of the material she had.
I thought that was fine. I mean, you could give a Razzie towards the movie, I suppose, quite easily. But I wouldn't say that, like, of all the critical weak points, that it's Sandra Bullock.
No, you could pick 100 things before landing on her performance.
Including one of the actors, more trivia because that's all we got. Mm-hmm. One of the actors is actually from our little town here in Montana, Troy.
Oh, yep. We looked him up. He's from from Montana. If that wasn't implicit enough, it was from Missoula, Montana, which is not where we are, but
just about. And he was over here, I guess, quite a bit.
A massive IMDb resume. Like
Independence Day, and just my gosh, he's been in every big movie back in the 90s to almost 2000s. He was making little bit parts in it.
A ton of stuff. Oh, and actually, watching the credits, this is the fourth or fifth credited role for Jack Black. He was was it Cryo Thug?
Yeah, that's right. I remember seeing the name and going, where was he in that?
Yeah, and then another, if any of you are into martial arts, Toshishiro Obata was credited as, he was one of the Cryo Thugs. I forget what Jack Black was credited but he established the, I believe it was National Shinkendo Federation in LA, which was hugely responsible in bringing Japanese swordsmanship into America. He's held a world record holder, held an extremely high regard in the martial arts world. He did a bit of, say, like stunt or like swordplay work back in the 80s and 90s. Like he even did stuff on TMNT, just with a mind towards safety because people
the
were
live
getting
action TMNT. Oh wow.
yeah, he didn't do that much, but I was kind of shocked to see that he just had he was one of the thugs that Phoenix de-iced. I was going to say resurrected towards the end, but yeah, I thought that was cool. He's got I've owned his manual on Shinkendo for quite a while, and actually taken a lesson from one of his students. So I thought it was weird that somebody of that stature would just have a tiny little role in the background. But yeah, we're still back to trivia and not about the quality.
I mean, I didn't mind Wesley Snipes' job in this. He had fun. It's obvious he had fun. I think he was enjoying just being a jerk to the extras, staying in character. You can just see that some of that just, I don't think was even planned or anything. I think like one scene where he was supposed to go up to that telephone booth. There's an outdated thing to say. But he like harasses one of the poor extras walking by before he gets to the phone booth, and he makes a couple of racist comments, which, oh my gosh, that's just you. That would never be in a movie nowadays.
No.
And even though he was just having a great time in that thing. Sandra Bullock seemed to do a fairly decent job. Sly was Sly. Yeah, you know.
No Rocky, but that's kind of the only role he's done that in.
I am the law. Yeah, so there's not a whole lot else to be said about this movie except that the writers were on point with, figuring out some of the weird stuff that would happen in the future, which fiction's stranger than life, apparently, in this case, I guess. Instead of it usually being the other way around.
Yeah, life or art imitates life. Life imitates art. It's kind of a mishmash of it all.
And politics. They don't die.
Well, politics. Always politics.
Always politics. Yeah. But I remember enjoying this movie as a kid and rewatching it later on down the road. I thought it was enjoyable and fun and goofy. And then when I rewatched it this last time, I almost regret doing so, just because wow, this really wasn't that great.
Yeah.
For the first time, I don't know. Yeah, and that's all I can say about the movie. To be
I think
honest
so.
With you.
Yeah, I feel like anything else we say will just be like tangential or just adjacent. But
words.
Yeah, we did The Mummy before. That was enjoyable, and this was not so good, but still just a movie to talk about. At least the conversation was good. So
yeah, and it was fun to go on about just how weird society's gotten. I mean, if anything can come out of this movie, it's that and that alone. So we can all appreciate the movie for that. So that being said, what's the next movie we're going to review?
We had a solid list. Potentially Dredd, or even Judge Dredd from roughly the same time, which I've seen Dredd but not Judge Dredd. But yeah, hopefully pick a little better one for next time.
We didn't mean to for this one. We thought better of this.
It sounded like a good idea, but here we are. So next one will be forthcoming, and we'll do a better job. First one was good. Second one, third time will be good.
These are well balanced offerings we're giving.
Yes.
Good and the bad, and the
good and the bad, everything in between.
Yeah. So there we go.
All right. And
hit the button. Scene. Hit the button.